If I asked you to name the one game that Lancer draws from most heavily for its mechanics, you would probably say 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And you'd be mostly right. In this new Learning From series, we're going to be tackling one tabletop role-playing game at a time, looking at its design heritage, its legacy, and its DNA, and seeing what one thing we can extract from it as a lesson to apply to our own designs. If you're new around here, hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and on this channel we talk about tabletop role-playing design principles, as well as the series of action horror games that we're building, the first of which is Clockworld, which is a post-apocalyptic Weird West setting. And if you're not new around here, welcome back. We've actually started posting some new videos on the Patreon page. Now, these videos are Sheriff's Office Hours, and it's where, a week after a video has launched, I sit down and I talk about new thoughts, other things I had to cut from the video, and go through some comments in an unstructured and unedited way. So if you want to see more behind the scenes and really see what I'm talking about and how I brainstorm things, go ahead and check out that Patreon page. It really helps support the channel. That sort of income goes toward the creatives that edit and make the art and do all of the stuff that makes these games and this channel so awesome. So really appreciate it if you're already a patron, and hope to see some of you out there as well. Last point of order I'll make is, if you are new to this channel and you haven't watched some of my previous design discussions, some of the terms I may be using in this video will be a little unclear or confusing, so I recommend checking out some of those other ones if you have trouble following some of the terms I use. Alright, let's dive right into Lancer and its secret origins. So a brief introduction to what Lancer is, for those that aren't familiar, is it is a mech battle tabletop role-playing game released in 2019 after a very successful Kickstarter campaign. Now, the style of game that Lancer is very tactical, very combat-focused, because that's the emphasis the game has. You don't have a lot of abilities that are related to when you're out of your mech suit and just walking around as a pilot. The focus of the game are these sorties, these missions you go on that have interesting and complex battle mechanics that you all have to work together to succeed at. And now, this combat system is the main draw of Lancer. It's why people want to play it. It's very tactical. You play it on a grid, it has really interesting movement mechanics and abilities, and it's very well balanced in how it's structured. Because no matter what type of character you are, you're going to have interesting abilities you get to use. And these abilities are organized basically into at will, ones you can do all day, encounter, ones you can only use per fight, and daily, ones you can only use once per mission. And this structure is just very clear and creates a great level of consistency throughout all of the abilities in the game. And it means no matter what sort of build you're going for, whether that's support or striker or a defender type structure, you'll always have a baseline abilities you could use, some that are a little flashier, and then your big guns you can only use when it really matters and you really want to swing a fight. Now, that structure is something we saw in Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, which was released in 2008. Now, 4e Dungeons & Dragons was met with a lot of criticism, and justifiably so. It was a huge divergence from the type of play that D&D had been enjoying for the 30 years prior, and it's the reason why Paizo ended up making Pathfinder, because they wanted to go back to more of the style that 3rd edition and 3.5 had enjoyed. However, what wasn't worthy of any criticism was that battle engine that it used. That combat system for 4th edition was awesome. It really made every character class feel just as badass as the next. It meant that whether you were a fighter or a barbarian or a wizard or a sorcerer, you had dramatic, interesting decisions you got to make every turn in a fight. And that's really cool, and something we haven't seen in any other edition of Dungeons & Dragons. And now, a lot of people balked at that because they were used to and appreciated that caster-martial divide. They liked that the wizards and the fighters and the rogues and the sorcerers had different ways of approaching problem solving. They liked that things felt so different, and that the sorcerers were capable of these wondrous feats while the fighters were capable of more simple but effective things that could be used all day. And there's nothing wrong with either approach, but neither is also correct. They serve different purposes. It's surprising to me that it took so long for people to appreciate that 4th edition combat design and then use it in their own game. And it fits perfectly in a game like Lancer, which is about tactical mech battles. They don't have to worry about preconceptions about martial caster divides or what the fiction is for a wizard or a sorcerer or a rogue. They can just take that engine and apply it into a structure that fits it perfectly. But now, I will reveal the secret origins of 4th edition because so many people haven't heard of this wonderful book. So in the twilight hours and the dying breaths of 3.5 edition D&D, a book is released called Tome of Battle, Book of Nine Swords. Now, Book of Nine Swords was released in 2006, just a couple years before 4th edition came out, and it was a book that was inspired by wuxia, the idea of the high-flying Chinese martial arts, and what it attempted to do was give these martial characters fun things to do every turn in combat. So let's take a quick look at how they did it, as it informed 4th edition's design, and therefore Lancer's. So the 3 new classes they added in this book, the Crusader, Sword Sage, and Warbringer, gained access to martial maneuvers, and these were analogous to spells. They ranged from level 1 to level 9, and they were divided into disciplines like Desert Wind or the Shadow School, which mirrored to a degree the different spell schools like Evocation and Illusion. And just like spells, these abilities could only be used a certain number of times per day, and we don't need to dig into the specific recovery mechanics that each of these classes used, but they had to be judicious about when to use their big guns versus using their weaker ones, in the same way that spellcasters did. And many of these martial maneuvers ended up being test runs for what would become many of the abilities in 4th edition and even into 5th edition. So let's go through a couple quick examples because I think this DNA, this lineage, is really interesting. For example, there's a Desert Wind style maneuver called Fire Riposte that looks a lot like Hellish Rebuke when you look at it. It's after you take damage, you can make a fiery touch attack at the person who hits you out to a certain distance, doing a nominal amount of fire damage. That was included in 4th edition and in 5th edition. There's a maneuver called Step of the Wind, and wouldn't you know it, 5th edition Monk has an ability just called that exact same thing. Both of them improve the user's mobility, letting them circumvent obstacles. There were a whole variety of leadership-like strikes, things that granted small buffs to your allies, or opened them up, or granted your allies more attacks, and all of those ended up becoming the core identity of the Warlord class in 4th edition, and then we can see that the Warlord got condensed down into the Battlemaster fighter in 5th edition. Back in 3rd edition D&D days, Paladins didn't have spells that were smites, they just had a smite special ability they could use. Now, in Tome of Battle, Book of Nine Swords, the Crusader class got access to various smite maneuvers that added extra holy damage to their attacks, or, banished the undead, set them on fire, all of that kind of stuff, which we end up seeing is part of the 4th edition Paladin implementation, and became central to how the Paladin worked in 5th edition. Okay, that's enough about Tome of Battle, Book of Nine Swords. I could talk a lot about its interesting design philosophy and how it added elements of randomization to certain recharge mechanics. There's a lot of cool stuff there. But what I want us to take away from this is that there's nothing wrong with giving marshals cool things to do. Now, it definitely changes the reality bar of those characters and makes them more wondrous or supernatural or amazing, but at the same time, it's super fun, and we can see how 4th edition really grabbed onto that and made it part of their central design philosophy, which then Lancer inherits. So what's the one lesson we want to take away here from Lancer and 4th edition and the Tome of Battle? Well, it's that the martial caster divide isn't something inherent to tabletop role-playing games. That your preconceptions about what different classes or archetypes mean are not sacrosanct. We can create games that give everybody fun toys to play with every turn of every session of their game. And I think that we should allow ourselves to be open to that, to questioning those historical structures, because we've seen for the last 20 years, even Wizards of the Coast has been willing to dabble in changing that up. Because when you start to shake that up, you start to question things, you can start applying them in unexpected places like Lancer did. What a natural progression that ended up being, and what a perfect fit that sometimes maligned structure of 4th edition ended up being for a mech battle game. That's why I think it's so important to dabble in role-playing games that may not actually be your normal jam. It's why I sometimes read through things like Good Society, which I'll probably never get a chance to play and isn't really what I go play tabletop role-playing games for, but because there might be lessons I could learn from it. I don't play a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, or Rules Light games, or Narrative First games, but there could be lessons in there that I could learn as somebody who favors a little bit more of the crunchy or tactical side of things. I would be a fool to think that I have all the right answers and only other tactical games have something to teach me. Well, I hope you enjoyed the sort of casual dive into Lancer and some of its design structures and its history. I find it really interesting, and I always look for an excuse to talk about the Tome of Battle Book of Nine Swords. I just think it's the coolest book that a lot of people don't know about. And now, if there are other games that you think have good lessons to learn from, and things that we could extract in this small series, definitely comment down below and let me know. We'll see about doing more of these if it catches on, and I will catch you next time on Tales from Elsewhere.